having complex PTSD is a lot like being the Incredible Hulk. When you're triggered, you can go into this state where you're not thinking straight. You can get kind of violent and scary. But also remember that the Hulk is not a villain. Complex PTSD isn't all terrible. There are terrible things about it, but there is another shadow side to it, or a bright side to the shadow side, that does make you sort of a very empathetic, very courageous individual. I think the real trick is to learn how to calm down your Hulk when you don't need him and say like, okay, Hulk, not today. Right now, everything is fine. And how to use him when it's actually relevant. People with complex PTSD can be truly the most powerful, empathetic healers once they have embarked on that journey.
Hi, welcome to It's All in Your Head podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Colbeth, and it's great to be with you. Today, we're going to talk about complex post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as cPTSD, with Stephanie Fu. Stephanie developed cPTSD after years of abuse she received that began during childhood. She wrote a New York Times bestseller about her experience titled What My Bones Know, a Memoir of Healing from Complex Trauma. Her account is brave, informative, and extremely hopeful. Stephanie is an inspiration to so many, and we are so glad she took time out of her busy schedule to chat with us. Hey, Stephanie, welcome to It's All in Your Head.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. We're super excited to talk to you. So, complex PTSD is something relatively new. And at MedCircle here, we know a lot about, or we know that a lot of different diagnoses still have a way to go for understanding. So I was hoping for the audience sake and just, education-wise, it'd be super helpful if you could just describe the difference between cPTSD and PTSD.
Sure. So you can get traditional PTSD from a single traumatic event.
Okay.
So let's say you were in a car accident, you could get PTSD from that.
Okay.
cPTSD is kind of like if you were in that car accident every week for years and years. It's when the trauma is recurring very often. And unless you're a very, very unlucky person, that probably means that you were in a relationship with or, betrayed by somebody who was supposed to love and take care of you. My complex PTSD comes from child abuse. It can also come from being in an abusive relationship, living in a war zone, that kind of thing.
And I think it's super, super helpful because just to give the audience context, it is really just knowing all the different types of abuse or trauma that can, contribute to that. So I think, appreciate you making that distinction. I think it's really important. So full disclosure, I've read the book, but for those who haven't read it, I don't want to give anything away because I highly suggest you go read this and you'll devour it like I did. You have endured physical abuse. And you had mentioned that probably around the age of 12, and myself with the bipolar 2 disorder, that was the age where I started to feel like something was, a bit different. And you'd mentioned that you struggled with depression and anxiety around that time. Was there any sort of treatment sought at that time? Or was it just, sort of, okay, I'm not really going to share this with anyone and we're not going to seek any sort of help?
No, definitely not. I didn't have a safe place to be imperfect, I guess, because I was in such a traumatic home. I didn't feel safe ever admitting that I was feeling depressed or anxious. Everything always had to be okay and good, and I had to be happy in order to sort of manage my parents' more scattered emotions.
Sure. No, now navigating that is definitely quite difficult. And knowing this, in knowing again what your story is, which is amazing. You talk a lot about, and I know a ton of people can relate to this, including myself, is you're feeling these emotions, you're not really understanding them, but damn it, I'm going to go be the best student. I'm going to get a scholarship. I am going to achieve my dream job by setting out and getting it and really exceeding standards of what, our society really ingrains in us, what makes you okay and makes you normal if you're doing all of these things. And if you could share with the audience a little bit about what your experience was like with the cPTSD manifesting itself in your working career, our audience totally gets what it's like to be working full time, working to achieve their dreams and working hard, but at the same time showing up and having panic attacks and just some really tough experiences. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how that manifested itself at work.
Yeah, well, growing up, I had to be, again, perfect in my life. I had to get straight A's. I had to get perfect report cards. And that, to me, perfection equaled safety,
Yep.
which wasn't that easy in a workplace or in life in general.
Right.
Especially not like being at like the top of my field working at This American Life. I couldn't be perfect. I wasn't.
Right.
And often I made lots of mistakes and I wasn't very good at all. And, as a child, I was beaten for being imperfect. And as an adult, I just beat myself up. I still felt that terror every time I messed up, that something horrible was going to happen.
Yep.
Even if I logically knew that it was going to be okay, I was like, I'm going to get fired. My boss is going to scream at me. And it just made my whole life kind of, in my work environment, really, really terrifying.
And I bet that had to just, in hindsight, exacerbate the cPTSD, because certainly knowing I worked full time in media, so I can relate to just the onslaught of things coming at you, be it clients, coworkers, editors, just all sorts of different people, personalities. And I know sometimes that's hard to navigate because we spend the overwhelming majority of time, most of us, at work amongst our peers. Something that you had done that I admire so much, and I just think was one of the boldest, bravest moves I've heard about, is you had gotten to a point, you'd achieved this successful career, and you said, my health needs to be focused on full time at this point. And you left the comfort of all the achievements, the job, the identity, and you prioritized your mental health. And that experience, I know a lot of people are super terrified to do and take that step. Can you share a little bit about what that was like when you made the bold decision that we all feel like we're going to get stigmatized for, which is, I really need to focus on this. It's gone untreated. It's gone either unidentified, and I'm going to prioritize this. And who the hell cares what it looks like? I was always afraid I'd never be employed again. Was my fear, right? If I left a job that I wasn't happy with. What was it like? Was it liberating? Was it terrifying to make the decision to say, my health comes first?
It was terrifying. Of course it was. It was definitely the bravest thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah.
And it was really sad. This was the job that I had worked for my whole life. This is, again, my dream job. I wanted to work at This American Life so badly. And, it came with a lot of power. It came with a lot of cultural cachet. And it was really hard to let go of that. The paycheck, the health insurance, the power. But I really credit my partner for being super grounding at the time. He was a teacher, and he was just very much like, this does not define you. I don't love you for this. Your friends, your true friends, don't love you for this career. And what is so horrible about being normal? About even if you never work in media again, is it so terrible to go and be normal and just get a normal job somewhere else?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, okay, maybe I won't work in media again. Maybe I'll just become maybe I'll become a librarian. Maybe I'll become a researcher. Who knows? So that was okay. And, part of it was a choice, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But part of it also wasn't a choice. Part of it was like, it got to the point where it was on Sundays, sort of freaking out all day Sunday about going into work on Monday, that like having panic attacks all day at work.
Yeah.
It just wasn't tenable anymore.
Right.
And so I also just wanted to be a better person. I didn't want to be the same person I had been this whole time. I didn't want to be stressing out. And I thought maybe there's a chance I could come back better, stronger, more capable of doing this and being happy at the same time.
You came back as a New York Times bestseller. I think that's a pretty awesome return and awesome achievement. What did that feel like? I mean, that is such an honor. And for those of us who've been in journalism and who've been around it and who love to write, that is surely a dream and a goal of many. What was that like to know your memoir hit the New York Times bestseller?
It was never a dream and a goal of mine.
Okay.
Because I just never expected that to happen. I was always
that's awesome.
Kind of like, well, that would be great, but there's no way,
Right.
So I got the call right before I was going out to dinner with a couple of friends, going to like this crazy sold out event that I had organized, and my publicist called me and she told me, and I was like, what? And I just started crying. It was definitely wild. Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah. I wrote this book with the intent of helping one person, truly. So the fact that it's done more than that I'm eternally grateful, really.
Oh, you're going to make me tear up. I remember saying something similar, if this podcast and a conversation with someone makes one person feel good, yeah. Good. Mission accomplished. Speaking of friends, loved ones, there's a part in the book that's very powerful about when you got to speak with another person who was diagnosed with this. And you refer to her as Lacey in the book. And it felt like such a powerful moment when you first met someone else with lived experience, having seen therapists and doctors and all these kind of, laboratory types. And then you meet the first person with lived experience. And how powerful was that for you?
I mean, Lacey was and is a badass journalist, is a really successful, smart, powerful woman. So to know that there was somebody else out there who had complex PTSD, but was out there killing the game, who wasn't letting her complex PTSD define her, and wasn't that she wasn't suffering from it constantly,
right,
was really hope-inducing. And she told me, like, it's hard work. I had to really put in the work to get to this place, but you can do it. And so that's when I really got my butt into gear.
Yeah. Well, there is something really bonding and special about that. I quit drinking decades ago, and I had entered treatment at the time, and I'll never forget listening to someone describe their alcoholism and me being like, but you're employed. You have a family. I even saw you laughing over there. Like, I thought that just didn't occur. It was all, I was kind of gobsmacked that, someone else could have this thing that was just dark and destructive. And, my life's kind of just dunsy. And they had this beautiful thing going on. And in that part where you speak about Lacey, I just personally love that because she was what you had needed to see to get that motivation and that hope. As you got that motivation, you use a term in the book I love, which is you're like, all right, now it's time to hack my brain. Like, let's get into it. Let's see what's what. And to your point, this is going to be hard work, but I'm down for the cause. And you go on, like so many of us, the search for therapists and different therapists. And, again, I relate, many people relate to this. What would you give as far as advice to anyone who's like, what's a good kind of suggestion or maybe a bar or something people can gauge to know, hey, this one might be a little more, effective, at least with me, than another person?
I just want to encourage people to remember that you are hiring the therapist, that they are working for you to help you. And if they are not helping you and they're not doing what you want, you don't have to see them.
Correct.
And that they might have the degree, they might have the knowledge of how brains work. They don't know your brain better than you. And if they're making you feel unsafe or scared, or what they're doing is just not working for you, you can always tell them and ask them for something different. And if they're not willing to provide that something different, then you can always see somebody else. And I think particularly with people with complex PTSD, it's really important to see someone who is comfortable giving up their own power and giving you power, empowering you in the session to make decisions, to ask for things, to be confident in the session. And, to constantly be asking what you need and affirming what you need. Therapy isn't just a thing that happens to you. It's a thing that you make happen and you get to control. You're an active part of it.
Yes. And I love that theme of agency. And so many times when you are either diagnosed, misdiagnosed, like so many of us are all over the place, it is sort of this, well, I'll take what I can get. They are from Harvard and that's where their degree's from. So obviously, like, I'm going to feel like a simpleton and sort of, less than or inferior versus sort of a partnership of like, you're supposed to be ushering me into, getting healthier and forming better habits. But a lot of people really genuinely, and I certainly didn't for many years, I didn't feel that way. I felt like I just kind of had to sit there and they were the best people I could get. Part of that agency that you displayed involved what I thought was just an awesome, voracious hunger for knowledge on what is going on with me. And I'm so motivated to get better. I want to understand this. And I want to use all of my, really journalistic skills that you've honed all these years. And we're going to go on a journey and we're going to talk to doctors. We're going to go back to my hometown. We're going to really, really, really try to understand this. And throughout your travels, throughout your experience, were there any therapies that really worked for you in particular?
I think that a lot of therapies worked a little bit. I think that that's a really important thing to remember too, is there is no silver bullet when it comes to cPTSD. And often you need a cocktail of things. One therapy most of the time is not going to cut it. Because there's a lot of different aspects of complex PTSD that need healing. Like there's the somatic aspect. When you are triggered, you sort of need your body to calm down in order for your brain to get calm enough for you to think critically at all about what's really happening. So for me, restorative yoga was really helpful for that. Learning some basic meditation stuff, breathing, all really helpful for that. Also, there's the intellectual side. There's talk therapy. That was really, so some CBT, some talk therapy was really helpful, but also EMDR was really helpful in terms of really getting, not just knowing that I was traumatized, what my parents did, but fully understanding it, reckoning with it, sort of speaking to the inner child. IFS was really ultimately helpful in sort of recognizing my inner child, recognizing my hidden superpowers. Relational therapy was super, super critical in terms of allowing me to understand how to interact with people, like retrain me how to love and be loved by other people, essentially, which manifested for me as like Google Docs therapy, which is a sort of unique experience. But I don't think that I would have gotten to feel as whole as I do now without that combination of a little bit of everything.
Yep. Yeah. I agree. It's a multifaceted maintaining mental health, whatever you're diagnosed with. It's definitely a faceted, sort of consistent type of campaign, really. And something you had mentioned, which I think a lot of us, this is like the hardest thing to come to terms with, is I want to stop hurting people in my life. And to your point a minute ago, relationships and relational therapy can be extremely helpful for those with cPTSD. It was extremely helpful for me, myself, to go through that and say, you know what, even if I'm not intending to hurt people, which I'm not, I'm the common denominator at the very end of the day, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And that's kind of a tough pill to swallow, because I think a lot of people will then, kind of beat themselves up. But really busting the myth of, I'm doing you a favor by, keeping you like at an arm's length, or I'm doing you a favor for I'm going to eventually hurt you. So, it's kind of one of these things where I don't know where this will go, this will last. For those of us where that's sort of the mix now, I think it's hopeful and cool to hear about your experience with who you called Joey in the book, but just reading about him and what it's like to meet another person who really, you don't have to feel threatened, the walls, go shooting up. You feel very accepted and in a loving, supportive environment. Was that uncomfortable at first? He seemed so emotionally, available. And I know for myself, I was like, wow, this guy's a gem as I'm reading it. And I thought, I don't know, maybe I would have gotten a little scared.
I mean, he's not perfect, he's a nuanced individual, just like all the rest of us. But yeah, definitely it took some getting used to being with someone who was more securely attached tendencies. I remember one Christmas, I was asking him if he wanted to do something on Christmas Eve, and he was like, "Oh no, of course I need to spend it with my family." And I thought, "Oh, that means he's going to be doing Christmas Eve with them. Whatever, it's fine." But I was a little pouty about it because I thought that we had sort of agreed previously that we were going to spend Christmas Eve together. Right. And then he was like, "Well, obviously you're coming. Like you're going to be there with my family, duh." So it was definitely something to get used to. I didn't want to move in with him at first. He really did. want to move in very quickly. I was like, this is psycho. You're a crazy person. But I followed his lead on a lot of things,
Aw.
and he has turned out to be right on a lot of things.
Oh, well, that's awesome. I'm glad you found that special person, because I know how awesome it can be to have them in your life. So thanks for sharing a little bit about him. Although he is not perfect, we are noting. We are noting. Another thing that you dive into, Stephanie, in the book, which I definitely wanted to cover for this conversation because I found it really impressive, but also super, super, super important. Maybe now more than ever, but what you describe is immigrant trauma and what that is like for communities who suffer that. Because as you read about it, obviously, it's horrific for certain communities, but for those, my grandparents were immigrants from Italy. They weren't treated kindly at all when they came to this country, either by, the people here or the mafia, who actually would target, their own. So they had their adversities. So for those of us who don't have that awareness, and a lot of us don't at this point, this age or younger, can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about that topic?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to try and understand a little bit of our ancestral trauma if we can, because our trauma is passed down culturally, of course.
Mm-hmm.
My parents uh, went through some traumatic things, and they probably just really did not know how to parent me, and
Yep.
then messed up pretty badly. But also, there is like an epigenetic element to it. There is evidence that the trauma that we undergo actually affects our epigenome, and that we can pass on our trauma to our children. So the fact that my grandmother survived so many wars, conflicts, were really struggling to survive and feed their families and not get assaulted by Japanese soldiers,
Right.
that has a possible impact on my genome
Yep.
and the way that I process trauma and scary things. And so, yeah, the fact that I hustle so hard at work, it might be because of my parents, it might be because of capitalism, it might be because this is how my great grandparents literally survived. So that's all really important. And then, yeah, there are definitely racial elements to
Sure.
complex PTSD,
Sure.
and complex PTSD can probably occur from experiencing repeated instances of racism. If you're made to feel unsafe all the time because of your race, your gender
Right.
identity,
Yep.
if you're very, very, very poor growing up,
Right.
and so it's really important to understand that trauma isn't just from your parents. It really comes from society at large, from history, from global wars and
Yep.
immigration and all of that. And
Yep.
it's a big task to tell yourself that you're going to heal all of that, and so you probably can't. There's got to be some level of acceptance of that.
Yes. Genetics are powerful things, and things that, get passed down. I remember when I was first looking through my family's genealogy and reading diaries, things we found, and all these people, and obviously I struggled with depression, but all these people were dying of exhaustion.
Mm,
That's what they used to put on there for like a full blown kind of like, nervous breakdown, I think is what,
yeah.
would be more accurate today. But this was way back when, and we had records. And I remember thinking, they died of exhaustion. That is just, man, you don't know really anything as far as a diagnosis, different things like that. But I think it's important to highlight that, because I think a lot of people assume if they're struggling with their mental health, it's taking place in some vacuum. Like, their parents and their parents' parents and their parents' parents' parents, like to your point, things they experienced aren't going to be passed down. I think that's actually pretty relieving, or it was to me at least, to learn that, this didn't come out of nowhere. There is a lineage that I can trace, and it's, I'm looking at it. And there's almost a sense, I think, of, at least for me, relief in a weird way, knowing.
Right.
I didn't ask for it, but
you have some responsibility over that, but it's not your fault.
Yes, that's a beautiful way to put it. And I also like to, I'm big on realistic expectations, right? Like, I don't want anyone blowing sunshine up my new year, what, and you're from the East Coast too, I'm big on, don't lead me down a primrose path. Give it to me straight. Don't tell me I'm going to take this pill and everything's going to be fine. I've come to find in my 40 some odd years here that I think a lot of strife with mental health comes with really dumb, unrealistic expectations. People walking out of sessions like, okay, I'm not feeling less anxiety yet. I'm not. And I think it's super important, to highlight that, the first time someone sat me down and said, look, you got this for life. There's no pill that can cure it, but there's a whole lot we can do to make your life fulfilling. You can be content. But do know in a realistic way, you're just going to have to do more maintenance maybe than the average person, was how it was described to me. But man, just knowing that, okay, yeah, maybe I'm not going to, get cured, but I can at least live with this and laugh and, have a family and meet wonderful people. But I think a lot of times expectations are so whack. That's almost, half the problem.
Nobody is perfect. And I don't know if you're comparing yourself to this perfectly sane, idealized person, that person just doesn't exist. Everyone's got their own neuroses. Everyone's got their own problems.
Oh, yeah.
Even like the richest, most privileged people definitely have dysfunction going up the chain.
Maybe more.
Yeah. And so, I think for a long time, I thought cPTSD made me really freakish, made me really different. Yep. And like, certainly there are things that are exaggerated in the way that I feel. Sure. But I don't think that any of these feelings that I have are totally foreign. I mean, most of them are human emotions.
Absolutely.
Sometimes exaggerated human emotions, but they are just regular human emotions.
Yep. My
responses to things are like healthy human responses to threat. Maybe I may sense threat too often, but
right.
Normal responses to threat. So it's important to keep those things in mind.
Yep. No, that's definitely great advice, because I remember always thinking, what do you mean people can't relate to depression? What do you mean people can't relate? Surely you've been sad. Just imagine that on like an everyday sustained basis, and that's more what it's like. But man, these all involve emotions. So surely, there is a way people can step in to your shoes. So you're putting all this work in and you're working really hard. Was there a point, or was it just, started to become so ingrained as just a fabric of your routine? Was there any sort of point where obviously, it's never going to be, I'm cured, but was there a point where you're like, I'm doing pretty good right now? Like, I've come, if I'm drawing a bar from like maybe where my worst was, like I'm seeing some improvement.
Yeah, I think it was sort of like this. I definitely during midway points through the healing process were like, this is better than it used to be. It's still very painful, but it's better. But definitely after my 4 months of therapy with Dr. Hum, there really was a feeling of, oh, I think I have a grasp on this. And I think I'm not the worst person in the world.
Right.
Just that feeling was really great. And at that point, I had sort of had a couple of years, a year and a half at least, of really practicing why I was feeling the way that I was feeling.
Yeah.
So I think the big difference was a lot of the times I still felt bad,
Yep.
but I understood why I felt bad.
Yeah.
And I was like, let me root through the toolbox and see if there's anything that I can do about it in this scenario.
Yep.
And so of course I still have my bad days. I just have better ways of coping with it.
Yep. Yeah. I love the word toolkit because you're right. Sometimes you got to get in there and take some of them out. For those who are struggling with cPTSD or might not even know they're struggling with it, something we like to end on with all of our guests is, what piece of advice would you give to that person who's watching, who's either, at the hopeless point? What advice would you impart?
I would say I love to sort of talk about the Hulk metaphor that Dr. Hum told me, which is that having complex PTSD is a lot like being the Incredible Hulk, in that when you're triggered, you can go into this state where you're not thinking straight. You're a little stupid, actually. You speak in like maybe 2-word sentences. You can get kind of violent and scary. But also remember that the Hulk is not a villain. The Hulk often uses those powers to help his friends, to stand up for what is right. And so complex PTSD isn't all terrible. There are terrible things about it. Right. But there is another shadow side to it, or a bright side to the shadow side, that does make you sort of a very empathetic, very courageous individual who has the guts to really stand up for those who are being oppressed, who are suffering. And so I think the real trick is to learn how to calm down your Hulk when you don't need him and say like, okay, Hulk, not today. Right now everything is fine. And how to use him when it's actually relevant. And I think once you're able to sort of harness the Hulk, your life gets so much better. And people with complex PTSD can be truly the most powerful, empathetic healers once they have embarked on that journey. It's a hard journey,
Sure,
but it's worth it.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on today and speaking with us. This has been so informative and fun to chat with you about it. And I know you're going to help way more than one person today with this, but just want to thank you again for your honesty, your bravery, and again, congratulations on the book. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you all for joining today's conversation with Stephanie. If you visit MedCircle.com, you can access tons of other conversations, including weekly workshops with our credentialed doctors, an award-winning video library featuring almost 1,000 educational videos. Become a member of our community today. Visit MedCircle.com to learn more. And thanks for listening to It's All in Your Head.